Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. Today we are diving into something that I see literally every single day in my practice, and it's confusing and no one knows what to do about it. So we're going to go into it. And that is sort of the metabolic changes that occur in later stages of perimenopause and menopause, which is, remember, that 1 year without a period, and then you are considered postmenopausal, and these changes can still occur. So you probably might be one of these women, or I've heard women who are trucking along just fine, and all of a sudden kind of going into our middle-ish stage of perimenopause, start to experience maybe some belly weight gain. Maybe you start to notice your labs creeping up, so like your A1C, your insulin level, your cholesterol, so your triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, these things start to become off, and you're like, gosh, I'm like doing everything so healthy, I'm doing all the right things, I'm eating the protein, I'm strength training, I'm sleeping, I'm drinking the water, I'm eating fruits and vegetables, and it becomes like this mystery. And I think that one issue that we've had in women's health is that this has gone on forever. This is as old as time. And we have consistently just kind of like swept it under the rug as, well, this is just something that happens when we get old. Maybe we lose like some CoQ10 or some minerals as we age. And these are just age-related diseases that happen. And so, increasing our risk of cardiovascular disease, et cetera, are just kind of things that women have to deal with. And I'm here to tell you that is not true. We have so much extensive research to show why why these changes occur at certain points in women's lives through later stages of perimenopause and menopause. So remember, a couple weeks ago we talked about the stages of perimenopause, right? So there's the early stage, which is like our mid to late 30s, early 40s-ish for most women, and that's just where you start to notice the cycle changes, where estrogen actually increases in relation to progesterone. The mid stages tend to be a little bit more pronounced changes happening. And then the end stages tend to be where your estrogen actually does get low. You start skipping menstrual cycles. You start maybe noticing some hot flashes or night sweats, things like that, which, by the way, I've said this before, hot flashes and night sweats, this specific symptom, and we're unsure exactly why this specific symptom does this, but that specific symptom, if it's severe in women, increases our risk of cardiometabolic diseases or osteoporosis and osteopenia. So if you're a woman who is experiencing hot flashes or night sweats, get that treated. There's herbal ways to treat it, non-hormonal. There's obviously HRT to treat it. There's ways to go about this, but it does need to be treated, which leads me to my next point of menopause needs to be treated. We have gone through this era where, research is showing us now that it can take up to 10 GP visits to be diagnosed with menopause. And one of the reasons for this, or there's a few reasons, is lack of uniformity of symptoms, right? So every woman experiences slightly different symptoms associated with menopause and perimenopause. And there's no standard blood test for it. There's no really like, okay, yes, now you're in perimenopause from this point forward. It's sort of like this subjective like shift. And because our hormones continue to shift and change and fluctuate so much for like 2 to 12 years, it's hard to catch them. And so a lot of practitioners are like, well, we don't even need to really check hormones because, who knows what it'll be like tomorrow. And that's true to some extent, but I still think there's labs you can run. I posted this last week on my Instagram, a reel about different lab testing that should be done for perimenopausal women. And I'm actually going to pull that up right now because I want to bring it up here too. So in perimenopause, I believe that there should be some certain things that are checked on regularly to kind of see where you're at. So these things include follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, your estradiol, progesterone if you're still having a menstrual cycle, and you can test 5 to 7 days post-ovulation. We should look at your thyroid function. We should look at your lipid panel, your vitamin D level, your insulin, and your A1C. Sometimes C-reactive protein is another great one to look in there, which is an inflammatory marker. And then, of course, anything else that is unique or individualized to you should be looked at. But these are all great blood tests to kind of just keep an eye on, look at baselines, look at trends over times, especially some of the cardiometabolic markers that I mentioned, because like I'm mentioning today, Those things are all part of the shift that occurs when we lose estrogen. So this shift that you might be knowing, I just had a woman yesterday who works out, does all the right things, is strength training and eating the protein, tracking the macros, has been notoriously really healthy, has had a good lipid panel for a long time. She's 56, has gone through menopause for a couple of years now, and her cholesterol is starting to increase, her A1C is creeping up, and it's sort of like one of those things where like you watch, and then oh, here's a statin, or here's metformin, or here's some Ozempic to get this under control. But what we're realizing through research is that it is due to hormones. Hormones dictate so many things that we never really realized before. We always thought that like in women's health, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone were just like physical things to help with fertility or a menstrual cycle. But we're realizing that like systemically, we have receptors of these hormones everywhere. So for example, like testosterone is a brain hormone. It creates a better libido, which is a mood, can help with cognitive function and focus and memory, word recall, all of those things. We're learning that estrogen has effects everywhere, from our brain to our heart, to our bones, to our muscles, to our metabolism. We're learning that it impacts our thyroid levels. It impacts everything. And so I think that if you're in this age group of like your mid to late 40s, 50s, and you're starting to notice the shift of things increase for you, it's time to recognize that all of this stuff that you're dealing with. So also you might have hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, insomnia, anxiety, heart palpitations. There is a list of perimenopause menopausal symptoms, literally like a mile long, from like joint pain and muscle aches to newer worsening autoimmune disease, to frozen shoulder, to burning tongue, to skin changes, and urinary, genitourinary syndrome, like frequency, urgency, all of that stuff. And I don't say all of this to scare you, but whether to empower you, because there's so much we can do for it. And it's actually a hormonal thing. So whereas the old sort of, way of thinking was, oh, I guess it's just menopause, like we're going to rule out the thyroid and some of these other, treatable conditions that we go through. And that's why I think it takes 10 visits to be diagnosed with menopause, because doctors are trying to rule out more air quote like treatable things. But A, we should treat menopause and perimenopause, and B, it absolutely is treatable through, HRT, but also, you guys, my whole entire career, I say this all the time. So HRT was deemed very scary in 2002. And that's when the Women's Health Initiative study came out and said it causes breast cancer. Every doctor in America ripped HRT out of their patients' hands. We had more women on HRT in the 90s than we ever did over the last 25 years. And as time has gone on, we've learned that that study was flawed. We've learned more information. We've learned how to use bioidentical hormones. We've learned different delivery methods. We've learned that those risks weren't exactly correct in the way that they were sort of given to the public. We've learned that the media did some things. So we've learned a lot since then, and HRT is on the up and up again, and women are getting better. But I have to say, my original background in healthcare was in Chinese medicine. And obviously we use herbs, vitamins, supplements, lifestyle, nutrition, movement, all of that stuff. And I have had my entire career up until the last couple of years under the presumption that HRT is really bad and really scary and causes cancer. And why would you do that? And so we have a myriad of medicinal things to do for all of these symptoms and syndromes associated with menopause and perimenopause that are also non-hormonal. For those of you who your comfort level is different, you have risk factors, you have pre-existing conditions, for whatever reason, you don't want to do the hormonal versions of this. And I also always want to give you the caveat of this, you guys. HRT is not an or decision. So I sometimes will get patients schedule initial consults with me being like, well, I don't know if I should like do herbs and supplements or HRT. And I'm here to remind you, especially as we go through this conversation today about metabolism and cholesterol and blood sugar and hormones and how it all interconnects, it is never just one thing. Estrogen, even if you take it, it's amazing, and can do great things, but it's never going to be a magic bullet for somebody. You still have to lift weights. You still have to walk. You still have to eat healthy foods and antioxidants and fiber and protein. You still have to sleep. You still have to manage your stress and your nervous system activity to get everything holistically in a good place. So I still work with tons and tons of women who are on HRT every day. And so I want to remind you, it's not an or, it's an and. It's a make the decision about HRT, an evidence-based one based on your comfort level, your risk factors, your unique situation. Pick a delivery method and a dose that's going to work for you. And also do, the herbs and supplements to support your body and correct imbalances, and do the nutrition stuff and the movement and the sleep and the nervous system regulation. We talk about the nervous system all the time here. It is the key for so many things. And even if you look at a lot of like the OB's books that are coming out, who I admire so much, they're pioneers for women's health for sure. A lot of them for treatment of like hot flashes, for example, or insomnia, are things like stress management techniques, or go to counseling, or try EMDR or meditation. And so, it's nothing that we need to overlook there either. So with that said, let's talk about why this is occurring, right? So as women transition through perimenopause and menopause, many experience changes, transitions in their metabolism. These things can be, like I've mentioned, an increase in total cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides, A1C, insulin, which can create this idea of insulin resistance. So that also will have profound effects over our health, because when we think about hormones, remember, think about it as a pyramid, and the bottom of this pyramid forever is going to be your insulin, your cortisol, and your adrenaline. And so if insulin's off, it creates more metabolic diseases, it creates inflammation, it impacts our brain, it impacts our energy, our hunger, our cravings, all of these different things. And so I know that sometimes insulin's not like the buzziest topic and funnest thing to discuss, but it is critically important to have basically like metabolic flexibility versus metabolic inflexibility, or be really sensitive to insulin versus resistant to it. So let's kind of explore some different changes around this. So like I mentioned, one of the reasons that this occurs specifically at this age, right? So if you're like trucking along and everything's been good forever, and all of a sudden you start to notice like you're increasing hot flashes, or your periods are slowing down, or that you're getting toward the end of your journey in perimenopause and menopause, and then you go get your labs done and you're like, dang it, my cholesterol is increasing, my A1C, my insulin, my blood sugar, all of those things. It's likely because of estrogen. Estrogen plays a really critical role in regulating metabolism, and as its level declines, it can lead to issues in your metabolism too. So there was a study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, and it found that decreased estrogen levels are associated with an increase in fat mass, particularly that abdominal fat, and a reduced lean body mass. So within the abdominal fat, there's two types. There's the visceral, and then there's the subcutaneous. The visceral is that hard, deep abdominal fat that surrounds our organs. That's the dangerous, like, health scary thing for us that we want to really change. The subcutaneous is not scary. In fact, there was research that I read a few weeks ago that showed women who have more of like that pear shape, right? So like holding more fat in like their hip area, and it's kind of like that squishy, like this is myself, kind of like a little bit more like that squishy, just subcutaneous, like on the surface fat, actually was for a place to store more omega-3s for our reproductive years. And so while it's annoying and everyone wants to get rid of their hips and things like that, it actually can be good for your health. So fat is a really nuanced conversation in terms of our health markers and things like that. And a better way to look at it is sort of like the waist measurements and the hip to waist ratio. That's a better way to kind of look at things in terms of body composition other than your BMI. So with the decline in estrogen, like I mentioned, women will see changes in their cholesterol. And so you have your high density lipoprotein, which is the cholesterol that brings stuff away from the heart. And then you have your LDL, which is the low density, or the VLDL, which is very low density lipoproteins, which is like our air quote bad cholesterol and brings cholesterol to the heart. This is typically the cholesterol that increases with the decrease in estrogen, is kind of that LDL. And, you know, I encourage you that when you're looking at your labs, there's going to be your total cholesterol, your HDL, your LDL, your VLDL, your triglycerides. Look at all of them and make sure they all are in a normal range, right? So some women will have an increase in LDL, but have a normal level of total cholesterol. And so we'd want to really just make sure that we're still working on that LDL, because that can show some insulin resistance and some metabolic changes. There was research from the American Heart Association that says postmenopausal women are at a higher risk of developing heart disease due to these changes, and insulin resistance becomes way more common during this time, which again was mostly just thrown under the rug as like, well, it's lifestyle or age, and there's really nothing we can do, but we are learning that it is due to estrogen. So these things happen and create insulin resistance, which means that your metabolism is less flexible. So when your metabolism is less flexible, what that means is that basically your energy comes from glucose, right? And your liver and muscles hold your glycogen stores, which is what your blood sugar goes into storage when it's when insulin puts it there. And once that's full, then it goes into body fat, because there's an unlimited storage room for that. And so when your body needs energy, it will leach out the stuff, the glycogen, from your liver and muscles first, and then it will go to body fat. And so what insulin resistance is basically being exposed to insulin over and over and over in high amounts of it. And insulin's a fat storing hormone. So it absolutely can contribute to body composition changes, weight gain, and it's really stubborn weight loss too. And we want flexibility that shows that our metabolism can burn through the glucose first, but then is able to get into our fat storage. A lot of us have this situation where it's inflexible, meaning that it'll burn the glucose or the glycogen first out of our liver and muscles, but then it gets hungry, and it is like, that's the hypoglycemic, right? That's the hangry, the jitteriness that I need to eat now, because it needs more fuel, because it's unable to tap into that fat storage for fuel for itself. And so we really want to create more of this flexibility. And I'm going to do a lot more podcasts on this because I think it's a really great topic. But to create metabolic flexibility, a lot of things can help that. So obviously estrogen and supporting your sex hormones can be helpful for that. But some other reasons that this is an issue is because of our nervous system. If your body's constantly in fight or flight, you are going to have a very hard time breaking into those fat stores, right? Like it wants to burn a whole bunch of glucose. And so that's an issue that needs to be dealt with for a lot of women. Also, ultra processed food. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to kind of like identify ultra processed food. There's a scale that's called the Nova scale, which goes foods from 1 to 4 and puts it, you know, kind of ultra processed or 4, obviously like whole food, like an apple would be number 1. But basically what we're saying here with ultra processed food is that the chemicals, the additives, the excess sugar, all of these sort of like addictive properties to this food break our regulatory mechanism in our brain and really impact our hunger. So your leptin, your ghrelin, your GLP1, which is part of your hunger and satiety type of hormones in our body, which is where Ozempic and semaglutide come into play. They are GLP1 agonists, but moral of the story, we want whole food nutrition that our brain knows what to do with, and it's not going to break the metabolism. You probably know, and I bring this up to patients a lot, that like literally the marketing message for Pringles, for example, is like, once you pop, you can't stop. And that's actually very accurate, because it throws off your hunger so much that we actually don't get any register of hunger. In fact, likely as you continue to eat foods like Pringles, you probably are getting hungrier and hungrier. And they're doing absolutely nothing for that. It's like our brain can't register that fullness or that satiety that food is creating. And so these ultra processed foods, for a myriad of reasons, can really contribute to metabolic disease, metabolic inflexibility, an increase in cholesterol, an increase in insulin resistance and A1C, and really kind of paint this picture for postmenopausal women. So we had a little bit more leeway in our younger years, but truly once we get into like our later 30s, 40s, and 50s, don't shoot the messenger here, but we just don't have as much flexibility. We lose certain things as we age, and we kind of got to get it a little bit more together than we did before. So because of this, like I mentioned, supporting your estrogen level will help to some extent, absolutely, but it is never going to be a magic bullet. I'm thinking in all of my years of practice, my patients who have gotten on HRT, I don't know that there's ever been really, and I'm talking about MHT, so menopause hormone therapy, which is testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. I don't really think that I've known anybody who has gotten on those that did no lifestyle changes that has just naturally lost weight. Like it just doesn't really happen, but it can help. That estrogen can help you with your metabolic function and therefore is worth exploring. There are also other herbs and vitamins that I use for my patients, such as, and again, please make sure these work for you, but such as things like maca root is really helpful at supporting your estrogen levels. I use a company called Feminescence. They have a postmenopausal one formula that's great for that. I also use Estrovera by Metagenics. That is a rhubarb plant that can be really helpful for menopausal symptoms, including hot flashes and things like that. Obviously all the lifestyle stuff that we've talked about to prevent cardiometabolic diseases and bone loss and brain health function is important as well. But a study published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that actually a Mediterranean diet is the best thing for metabolic health. And I'm pretty sure I've read this a lot of times lately. I'm trying to think where else, but basically for most all health conditions, the Mediterranean diet or style diet is kind of like the gold standard. So I'm not a fan of diets. I'm a fan of moderation, but I do think emphasizing the basics, you guys, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and whole grains meaning a lot of fiber in there, healthy fats, olive oil, nuts, avocado, nuts and seeds can really help to kind of decrease that insulin resistance and cholesterol levels. So I think that is important. I also think that regular physical activity is really important. The North American Menopause Society, which is a really great website, they recommend at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity per week, along with 2 or more days of like resistance training. So break that up in terms of like the moderate intensity, which I think can absolutely be like a brisk walk, and break that up into 150 minutes. I know that that might sound like a lot to begin with, but I really do think that if we plan on aging well and feeling our best in our 70s and 80s, this is like a great place to start for that. And this can be, you know, aerobic exercise. If you don't want to walk, it can be swimming, it can be cycling, it can be your group fitness class, it can be any of those things. And then I definitely think that resistance training specifically for insulin, strength training and weights, increase our lean muscle mass, which is imperative for insulin. And it also really helps your bones, from developing further into osteopenia and osteoporosis, which is, we don't want fractures. They're detrimental as we age. And then, like I mentioned before, you guys, we can't ignore the sleep, stress, nervous system parts. If we're constantly running in fight or flight, none of this is going to have a chance at getting into a good place, right? So think about that pyramid again: insulin, cortisol, and adrenaline. If those things, no matter what stage of life you're in, if you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, if your nervous system isn't relatively regulated, like I said, inflammatory markers, gut health, your microbiome, your hormones, your hunger, your cravings, your energy, your sleep, all of these things are going to be off, including your brain focus, memory, word recall, cognitive functioning. All of those things can be off. So I work with my patients on sort of navigating like the sex hormone part of things, but also the nervous system part of things, and come up with a plan super holistically and comprehensively of like, what are your goals now? How do we want to protect our future, our health in the future? And like, honestly, what is the lowest hanging fruit for that? Because I personally don't want to make wellness a full-time job for myself. I've been there and done that, and it was actually more stressful than it was beneficial. I want to use my health to go live my life and parent my children and run my business and be a good wife and a friend and be social and go have fun and joy in my life. I don't want to think about, all of these regimens and rituals and things that I have to do to maintain my body. And so that's sort of like the balance that I really try to bring with my patients, is that sort of this all or nothing, or like this obsession around health and wellness can actually, and this is maybe a topic for another day, but actually truly bring you in the wrong direction. It can really make things worse by the way that it activates our nervous system, creates a lot of fear and anxiety around it. So I hope this was helpful. There's a lot of other considerations. Like I said, if this is you and you have started to notice these lab changes, you're starting to notice the belly fat or just your body composition change, there's a lot of considerations, but I just really wanted to bring out the fact today that estrogen and the decrease of it can absolutely contribute here. The treatment of it is to figure out more individualized why. Why is your metabolism struggling? Have you dieted too long? Too much ultra processed food? Too much stress? Sex hormone issues? Your cortisol is off the chart. We have to figure out kind of like what's going on here. Is your gut health in a pickle with, your gut microbiome? You don't have enough akkermansia, for example. And these are things that I do with my patients every day to really get everything under control for them and get them feeling better, feeling more confident and in their body. And then obviously we want labs to look good as well. So I offer free 15-minute consults where we can chat about your situation, best next steps moving forward. I obviously have this podcast and this YouTube channel, which I record this on both every week now. I have a lot of free resources in terms of trainings and guides. I have my Instagram account. So please take advantage of all the free resources that I have, just trying to put out there to really educate women. That's my biggest thing, is to educate women on their health so that we can feel confident and empowered and know kind of what's going on with ourselves as we continue down the path of life, right? So I'm always happy to answer questions. You guys can DM me on Instagram anytime or write comments wherever you are at, and I'm happy to help. So I hope you guys found this episode helpful. If you feel like this was helpful and you have friends who are going through perimenopause or menopause, please share this episode with them as well. I will be back next week.